Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It is Monday, May 15th. Derek Van Riper here with Eno Saris. On this episode, we discuss the injury to Drew Rasmussen and the overall strategy of taking on the risk of injured pitchers and how you have to really trust your depth to be able to do something like that. We had the return of James Paxton since we last spoke, so we'll talk about whether or not he looks like he's actually all the way back from a variety of different injuries that have cost him time in recent years. And we're going to talk about rest of season projections and how they're actually a buzzkill and how to actually navigate using them in a way that doesn't make you sad. With that, we got a few mailbag questions to get to at the end of the episode as well. Eno, how was your weekend?
It was filled with Little League baseball, and I took the kids on Mother's Day to get them out of their mom's hair to the other Little League baseball. Oakland, ouch, sorry. I asked my kid, did they play? Did they play any differently? Like, what did you notice is a big difference between like your Little League games and the game we went to on Sunday? And he goes, well, they throw harder and run faster and hit the ball harder. And then he said, and they drop fewer balls. And he goes, well, the Rangers drop fewer balls. But it was a wild weekend because I saw something I'd never seen before. And to really set this up earlier in the game, so my kid, older kid, is in the playoffs. And earlier in the game, a kid ducked because the command is pretty bad in Little League, and so a kid on our team ducked, and he got hit in the back, but the ball also hit his bat behind him because they don't do as good a job, the little kids, in dropping the bat if they're trying to get out of the way, or you know what I mean. Major leaguers do a better job of sort of getting the bat out of the way so they don't get the foul ball thing, right? But he got hit in the back and the bat, and it was ruled a foul ball. He made his way onto the field, and then he had to get pulled for a pinch runner because his back was killing him. So we were yelling at the kids like all game, like, drop the bat. Like, if you're gonna duck out of the way, drop the bat. So fast forward, we're actually in extra innings. It's only the sixth, but with the rules anyway, it's extra innings. The other team that is going to play the next playoff game is both of them are there, and so we've now got like fans for 4 teams there, and like parents and fans and family, and then 4 teams actually in the space. And they went up ahead 9-7, and then our kids tied at 9-9, and their best hitter Caleb was up, and Caleb Lee hits the ball, like he can hit the ball to the fence, and he throws the hardest on the team. So everyone's like, oh, they got it in the bag. The other guy throws, and it goes right at Caleb, and he ducks. And his bat, he doesn't drop his bat, and we're all yelling, drop the bat, and he doesn't drop the bat, and the ball hits the barrel of his bat and goes into play. And everybody, including the parents, including the umpire, the coaches, everybody for at least 2 seconds has no idea what's happening. We're all just staring at that ball, being like, it's in play. Wait a second. And then everybody on our team, run! and the kid just runs to first, and then our team is celebrating but also looking at the umpire being like, which is actually, a more common thing now in the era of replay, isn't it? This weird celebration that we have where we're like, did he get the shot off in time? They're going to call pass interference. Did he cross the goal line? So like we have this weird, like, yay, looking over at the video, And so the kids were kind of celebrating, but waiting for the umpire to come over. And the umpire came to the coaches. He's like, I don't know, man. Fair. That has to be a fair ball, right? It's a fair ball. And they're all like, yeah, I guess it's a fair ball. So everyone's sort of like, well, that was weird. That was a walk-off with an exit velocity of about 2.
Yeah. So you're looking for.
It just died right in front of the plate. You're just all like, oh, fair ball. Run!
So by the end of that game, you said there were 4 teams because the next 2 teams were getting ready to play, and then all the parents and fans and everything. There were probably more people watching the end of that game than there were at the game you went to on Sunday.
Well, Sunday's, it was Mother's Day, it was a day game. I think there might have been, we were trying to estimate, think there might have been 7,500 to 10,000 people there.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Which is good. But the days that they spend like Monday through Wednesday reporting at 2,800 attendance, but that number is just the season ticket base. And we've done some like trying to count as riders like on those days, and there are days where it's below 1,000. We're pretty sure. So because if you think about it, Tuesday against a nobody team with the Oakland talking about how they're going to move to Vegas, even if you bought season tickets for the year, like you may not want to go, especially on like a rainy, cold day. So we've had some thousands in there when they reported 2,800. So I wanted to give them due. Yeah, Sunday was a fun day. They had a nice little giveaway, and we had a good time at the park. And the A's got blasted 11-3.
But you had a good time. That's the important thing.
Yeah, we did.
And Mom got a break. Also a good thing.
Break. Yeah, and I had to buy the kids crap over and over again.
Oh, I saw that. The keychains, the Ohtani, Verlander, those. Not even close. I mean, I don't know what you're supposed to do.
These squishable keychains. The first one was Verlander. I was like, is that Jose Altuve?
If you had to paint something on your thumb that resembled another person, I don't know how you'd really ever do it, but they try.
You'd probably do better than that.
Well,
maybe. And then baseball cards. We did some baseball cards. So
nice.
It was a fun day.
All right, well, let's get to it. Let's get to the first big injury item of the day. Drew Rasmussen, unfortunately, has a right flexor strain. They immediately placed him on the 60-day IL, so it's going to be a lengthy absence for Rasmussen if he's able to return at all this season. I think that's a bit of an unknown at this point because a lot of time flexor strains are a precursor to actual UCL tears. Drew Rasmussen has had 2 Tommy John surgeries. We talked about this before. The Rays are an organization that will take chances on players with arm injuries in their past. That's just something they do. It's in part because they see value. They see guys that the market undervalues, and they think they can get a lot of mileage out of those players, and that's just kind of what happens. Like they don't, as far as everyone's understood, the Rays don't break pitchers any more often than other clubs. It's not a Rays thing to break them. It's a Rays thing to select players that have reasonably scary track records health-wise.
Yeah, I think part of it is actually a roster construction thing. You have an unlimited IL during the season, And so they're just like, hey, we can actually have more players on our team if we just have a massive IL every year. And then also, when you're trading, the guys with injury histories, they have, they don't bring us back much back in trade. So we get a discount on these guys and we can house more of them. So let's just house a ton of them and see. And it's also like a dice roll where it's just like, yay, it's a dice roll for everyone in terms of health every season. So what if we just took more dice rolls and we just had a ton of people on the IL and we just kept rolling that dice? One year, we're going to have 3 healthy aces, in September, in October. And so, it's not, that's still a little cynical and it's not great. I mean, they could come up with some other option, but remember we talked about this on Rates and Barrels last week where it's like, imagine being the first team to be like, yeah, we're all going to throw 4 miles less than our maximum,
Yeah, it'd be so hard to commit to that. If your jobs are on the line, I don't know how you could, in good faith, say, this is a great idea. Let's try this.
Yeah, but you have heard that. You've heard that thing about how this is a precursor to Tommy John, right? Like so I did go looking for that. And I found a study that said 1 in 5 pitchers that gets a flexor injury like this has Tommy John within the next year. So that's not everybody, but it's still a lot. And a third TJ, as far as I can tell, Johnny Venters, Jose Rio.
Wow, Jose Rio? That's a while ago too.
Yeah, and Jose Rio, they weren't even sure that they were all Tommy Johns. It was like sort of, he had a bunch of surgeries, and we think 3 of them were Tommy Johns. Any case, I added it all up, and there were 3 pitchers who've had 3 Tommy Johns, and they added up to about, I think it was 140 innings, all combined post third Tommy John.
Yeah. So there's like the question of how many innings can they throw, and how good are you going to be when you come back from all that? Which is,
and none of them were good. Oh, Jason Isringhausen. I don't think any of them were good when they came back.
It's a shame because Rasmussen has turned into such a great starter. I mean, it's been an amazing story. Ever since he got to Tampa Bay, he's just been a completely different guy overall. Sub-3 ERA, great whip, plenty of strikeouts. You feel terrible for him. And I think it's also, if you think about how the economics of baseball work, he's never had a chance to really get paid either, right? That's the other hard part about how the pre-arbitration system works, the number of years to free agency, all of the service time things are in play here. So, you hope it's not another Tommy John for Rasmussen. You hope for the best that by maybe August he could be back throwing again, possibly in game situations, but nothing is guaranteed at this point. And as far as the Rays go, of course, a ton of wins in the bank early on this season. Having all these guys that have these injury histories, we know they've got more arms ready. Taj Bradley's been struggling at AAA. We talked about that the last couple of Tuesdays. His last start did come on regular rest, 4 days rest, though. So it seems like they've begun that process of getting him back on a major league schedule, which now seems even more imperative than it did even before they just demoted him a few weeks ago. And you've got Tyler Glasnow scheduled for at least 2 more rehab outings before he's going to rejoin this rotation. So they've got to find a way to keep it afloat in the next couple of weeks, just before they at least get Glasnow back. But you get the sense that Taj Bradley, despite his struggles, is going to see another prolonged run with the Rays at some point in the near future.
Yeah, and I think even if he comes up and only pitches twice and they option him again, that it gets dicey, right? Isn't it 3 options in a year, or is it 5?
I think it's 5.
Okay, so they can still play around with him some, but think about this: like, Drew's out for a long time, and Fleming, Springs is out for the year. So even if Bradley comes up just for 2 starts before Tyler Glasnow comes up, the rotation will be McClanahan, Eflin, Glasnow, Fleming, and Chirinos. Chirinos has had like 2 surgeries, TJ, and then a fractured elbow. And Chirinos and Fleming are both maybe using openers. So you're using openers on 2 of your guys. If Bradley gets it right, like let's say he comes up, pitches well for 2, and then they still say, hey, we want Glasnow up. We're going to send you back down. We're still working on fastball command, whatever it is with Bradley. They send him down. If he goes down and then starts dominating in the minors, and Fleming or Chirinos are either chewing up bullpen arms with the opener strategy. I think doing the opener strategy for 2 guys is going to have an impact on your bullpen, or just not performing as well as you'd like. It'd be pretty easy to bring Bradley up. And then there's the fact that any one of them could still get injured. Right. So I think Bradley is still in line for, another 70 innings or so in the major leagues this year. I think that would be a good estimate, 70, 75. I think he can do that. And so he's going to have some good value. I'm glad that I held on to him. And even if he gets demoted after 2 starts, I may hold on to him for at least a couple weeks beyond that, to see what happens with Fleming, Chirinos, and to see if there's another injury.
We'll probably have to dig in a bit more on Tuesday during Project Prospect, but there is a pitcher in their organization named Sean Hunley at AA. We received a question about Sean Hunley. I had never heard of him prior to this question. He's got a 104 ERA and a .66 whip at AA. He's repeating that level after pitching there last year. Hunley was pretty good at AA last year in the sense that he had like a mid-3s ERA, but 6.7 Ks per 9. He's getting more swinging strikes.
Swinging strikes.
Something changed in this profile. He's always had control based on what he's done in the minor league so far, but now he's getting swinging strikes.
I wouldn't bet on him to contribute to the major league level except for in the bullpen this year, because what I see, 27 games, 10 games started in 2022. So not only did he not have a ton of innings in the 93 innings, but he had this dual role action. So I think there's a little difference in sort of pushing a guy who had 10 starts last year, regardless of how many innings he had, to pushing him to 20 or whatever starts this year. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think if he does come up, I'd be more likely to be like long relief bullpen, maybe Fleming, Chirinos type role at best. But there is another guy that I like in the minor leagues that is pushing himself to the forefront of this discussion. It's Elvin Rodriguez. Elvin Rodriguez had great stuff plus in the minors. The one problem with Elvin Rodriguez is he's not in the 40 man. And I think that's a Hundley problem too. Yep. So the thing that with the Rays is that they just do not release people. They really, really try not to release people. And so if you are betting on Elvin Rodriguez or Hundley to, get into the picture, you're asking them to release, I don't even know, Zach Littell.
One of those last relievers. And it's always a problem.
Doesn't work out.
Because they don't have anybody on the 15-day IL right now other than Glass now. So they don't have someone they can shift over who's been out for a little while. So they have to really create that spot by letting someone go or risking losing someone to waivers.
If it comes to a point, they will. If push comes to shove, they'll do something. But push comes to shove is a different definition for them than for other people. They will lose some games in June. They've banked so many wins too, right? So they'll just be like, hey, we'll come back to the pack a little bit in June. It's fine. We'll do Fleming and Chirinos. So there is that risk always with them that like something like that could happen. But I think the closer it gets to the end of the season, the tighter it gets to the top of the AL East, which looks like it's going to be super competitive this year, the more likely that they're like, hey, no, we really want Taj Bradley up here, and I think we might want Elvin Rodriguez up here. So, that's something to watch is the table, the standings, and then what their injury and 40-man situation is. Almost more than anything, the corresponding move is always the key.
Well, sometimes the corresponding move is just the unfortunate result of someone getting hurt, though. And when you stockpile guys with bad injury histories, it sort of just the spots open themselves. That's sort of the awful truth, right? Like it just happens. You say, well, we're okay. There's a spot.
But you're right that all of their guys that are hurt are on the 60, except for Glass.
Yeah, and you can't rule out a trade, though.
I to keep from crying.
I brought it up on the 3-0 show, the trade they made with the Brewers a couple of years ago. That was a late May trade that got them Rasmussen and JP Fireeisen for Willy Adames. So maybe something like that is in the works just because they've got a little extra depth right now. The outfield just looks so crowded. You look at their outfield depth chart right now. Obviously, they like Jose Siri. Josh Lowe's playing really well. We're going to get to him a little bit later in the show. Randy Arozarena is having his best year yet so far. Luke Raley's contributing. I don't even know if I said Manuel Margot yet. He's still there.
Raley was the guy that they nursed. They kind of massaged the roster to get him on. You know what I mean? They made some choices about sending people down that other people were surprised about, Aranda and other guys. And it's worked out for them because he's 50% better than league average with a stick in sort of a part-time lefty only. DH-ish, first bases kind of role. And the other guys that they sent down that we were excited about in terms of Curtis Mead and Jonathan Aranda and Vidal Brujan, other young guys that might have pushed him off the roster, are not playing well. I mean, those guys are on the 40-man. They're in the minor leagues, and none of them is playing well. So,
I guess there could be some other sort of roster manipulation move that they have up their sleeve. I'm just really curious to see what it is.
Aranda's playing okay. I'm sorry. I don't want to lump them all together. Curtis Mead is not playing well.
He's hurt, too. At least he was for a stretch. I don't know if he still is at this moment, but there was an injury in his track record.
If you use the 40-man as a guide and their minor league work right now, then Jonathan Aranda is still the next man up batting-wise. And pitching-wise, it's definitely Taj Bradley. He hasn't been announced yet. But in terms of starting capable players in the minors that are ready right now, it's Taj Bradley and nobody else on the 40-man.
You have to be looking at these last couple outings from Yanni Chirinos and saying, wow, we kind of got away with one because he walked 8 over 10 and a third innings and struck out 1 in those 2 outings combined.
That's what I'm talking about. He's on my labor squad, and I'm just like,
just so nervous every time he's out there.
I just drop him, don't I?
It's hard to drop a guy with a 2.22 ERA and a .99 WHIP in a 12-team AL only league, though.
Colby White is not starting. I just want to make sure that. So yeah, that's Bradley is it, and that's interesting too. Is that Bradley is it? The cupboard is bare after that, so that's why Elvin Rodriguez and maybe Hundley matter. But they will have to make some moves before that.
And then you could do something with Hundley that you've done with Chirinos or Beeks. You know, you could make him one of those guys, the bulk guy that follows someone else. I don't know if you could make more out of Jalen Beeks. You know, I think other teams would try. I don't know.
Really far down though.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to happen in Tampa. I think it'd be somewhere else where they just say, let's see what happens if we give Jalen Beeks more innings. I don't think it's necessarily a good move for that reason that you just mentioned. James Paxton is back. James Paxton is back? Like, he's back from the IL.
What's the punctuation on there?
Yes, I use an exclamation point because I'm excited about it because for the last couple seasons around the injuries, every time you look at projection, James Paxton would still have very good projections for a guy that's missed a lot of time because when we've seen him, it's been a ton of strikeouts. It's been a acceptable walk rate. And in the past, earlier in his career, especially a couple of those peak years in Seattle, he did a good job keeping home runs down. I don't know if you're going to get all of those skills again, but the pitch mix and the velo at least looked like it did before all the injuries in his first start back with Boston over the weekend. That was kind of surprising to me because he didn't exactly carve up everybody during his time on his rehab assignment either. I was a little bit cautious going into the weekend, not knowing what to expect from Paxton. So how optimistic are you that Paxton could actually be a source of quality outings for this Red Sox rotation and for us as fantasy managers where we're so desperate for good starters on the wire?
Well, I mean, the good news is the fastball looks like it's back, and that is something that you can talk about in short samples. So I'm trying to look back to 2020 when he pitched in Seattle, didn't he? Why isn't he showing up? Was he a reliever? Where's James Paxton on this list?
The last time he pitched in Seattle?
Yeah, was it in 2020? Didn't he pitch in Seattle?
He made one start in 2021. He was with the Yankees in both 2019 and 2020.
Oh, so I'm looking for 2021?
Well, 2021 was the year that he made one start and got hurt during that start.
With the 1.1 innings?
Yeah.
Well, he had a 115 fastball stuff plus back then too. So I just mean, he's a guy that's interesting that his fastball has always been his best pitch. And that was something that went away when he was hurt. Now that he's back, he's got that 115 stuff plus on his fastball again. So I would say his fastball is back, and TBD on the breaking balls. We're not going on much sample here, but the fact that his fastball is back is good enough for me to buy. I mean, like, of course, cautiously and not necessarily dropping a lot, but like people have asking me, would I drop Brian Bayo for him? Yes. Would I drop Roansy Contreras' fastball is gone.
Ah, yes. You said you dropped Roansy Contreras in a league this weekend?
I did drop Roansy Contreras this weekend because his fastball has lost 1.5 inches of ride and a couple ticks of velo. And it's directly related to his lack of strikeouts, his lack of whiffs, his lack of production. And, in terms of how you want to use him at home. Oh, then you got 5 runs hung on him by Toronto. So there's, 7 runs by Houston. You would have used him, Houston at home, wouldn't you have?
This version of Houston? Yeah, probably in 15 teamers at least.
So I just feel like every other game at home could be a blowout. And then in every game on the road, I feel nervous throwing him. So would I drop Roansy Contreras for James Paxton? Yeah, maybe, dude. I mean, look at that. 1 strikeout, 1 walk in his last start against Baltimore.
Yeah, it's really strange. A few really nice outings, strikeout wise. I mean, that was one of those was against the Reds. Pretty good start against the Dodgers at home in late April too. 6 scoreless, just 2 hits, 5 Ks in that one.
Breaking ball. He still has a good breaking ball.
Yeah, how fixable is something like this?
It was there before, but how fixable is it in season is another question. Like it just seems to me like something's off, and I doubt, like, unless they send him down.
Oh, would they? He's pitching a little better than Oviedo, right? I mean, it's close.
You'd think that Oviedo would go down, but Oviedo to me is like there's nothing to really fix.
Oh,
Sorry.
jeez.
I just mean like he's a good pitcher with like a lot of pitchers, a lot of pitches. I don't see I said before the season I didn't see him as part of the future. I saw him as a guy you have while you have him and you use him and you try to get the most out of him. You try to coach him to use the best of what he's got. But he's got no pitch over 100 stuff plus, and that was the same thing I saw before the season. I don't really see an out pitch, and I don't see a great fastball. So everything's like okay, and maybe he can have a good year or two when he like finds good command and like uses his pitches well. Contreras is someone that you want for the future, in terms, and Luis Ortiz is that for me too. So if either one of these guys is ever going to do the Mitch Keller, it's going to be Luis Ortiz or Lorenzo Contreras. I don't think it's going to be Oviedo.
We should talk about Mitch Keller since you brought him up, and he continues to grow the word cloud, his name within the word cloud for the show history. A 2.38 ERA, a 102 WHIP, 69 strikeouts, and 56 and 2/3 innings. I mean, it's all there. The underlying skills are there.
Still projects him for a 4.82.
So this is where, I mean, we're going to focus a lot on hitters and rest of season projections, but I think with pitchers, it's easier to convince yourself that things are very different now than they were when the last 2 or 3 years of track record was put in place. Because you can see the differences in a pitcher's arsenal and with velocity and movement and all those underlying characteristics. You can go more granular with it, and you can, with some confidence, say, yes, that is the pitcher he was, and yes, those are the numbers he would deserve if he was doing the same thing he was always doing. But this goes back even to the end of last May, if I'm not mistaken. I think our buddy Jason Collette had the tweet. No, I'm confusing Jason Collette with Joe Block, both J names, I guess. Joe Block, one of the media folks for the Pirates, one of the announcers. He's been good for about a calendar year. So it's not just a hot start. It's a longer window now where Mitch Keller has been the best version of Mitch Keller that we've seen in the big leagues.
Yeah, that's a good point. Let me do a game log thing here. Because he basically added the sweeper halfway through last year.
Mm-hmm.
So if we just, I'm actually not doing the like, oh, he had a bad game on August 5th, so let's start at August 10th. I'm not doing that. I'm not even looking at his results. I'm just going to pick, I remember that he was throwing the sweeper in July, so I'm just going to start with August 5th. That's what I'm doing. August 5th to now. 114 innings, 120 strikeouts, 37 walks, 2.75 ERA. It's a pretty good sample.
Yeah. If you do the past calendar year leaderboard, pretty easy to pull those up over at Fangraphs for anyone who's never looked at that before. Mitch Keller is 27th in WAR among starting pitchers over the past calendar year. It's 183 innings with almost a strikeout per inning. Fastball's been good. I mean, that puts him in the same range as Logan Gilbert, Blake Snell, not that far from Dylan Cease. It's slightly ahead of Drew Rasmussen. It's ahead of Scherzer and Woodruff and Alek Manoah and McClanahan in terms of real life value. That's a high volume of good innings from Mitch Keller. So if you're not trusting it because it's only been a month and a half, I think you need to pull back and actually accept this. And I guess I got to ask, we're in between updates on the pitcher rankings being kind of in the middle of the month, but where do you think Keller would land if you were re-racking the rankings today?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because someone is mad about where I put him, even though I've been pretty upbeat about him and had him above most people going into the season. He had the good stuff, and what you're seeing here is what happens when you have good location and you give a guy with good stuff a good location year. It may not happen every year that he has good location, but he right now has the good stuff and the good locations. And there's two things that come to mind. One is a slight mea culpa. We did not run Location Plus into the rest of season projections on that first run. We had a reason for doing it, which was that Location Plus doesn't work in the smaller samples. And so we thought we'd just leave it out completely. We could have done some heavy regression and put it in anyway. That might have changed his rest of season projections somewhat. The other thing is that I have this difficulty that always arises where you like someone preseason and then they do well and they kind of go nuts. And then you are trying to be sober about it.
You had this problem with Rasmussen last year, probably.
Yes. Yeah.
You were all over
ranked
him.
Rasmussen high, and he was doing really well. And then I was actually ranking Rasmussen below other people because, like, well, I don't know about the depth into the games and the quality starts and the wins. And I don't know,
Well, you were trying to be reasonable, reasonable with regression.
I'm trying to be reasonable. That's what I'm trying to be. I'm trying to be reasonable. And so maybe I actually was not as aggressive on Mitch Keller as I should have been because I was just trying to be reasonable. But right now, I don't really see what the problem is. He's got a ton of pitches. Almost all of them rate as above average or average by Stuff Plus. His slider is, I think, the second best or best. I think it might be the second best slider among starters. So you've got the sweeper, you've got the cutter, you've got the sinker, you got the fastball. Both fastballs are above average. He's throwing the curve and the change, and none of them are bad pitches. And he's putting them all in decent locations. So I think he's just like, hey, this is what can happen if you develop your stuff to the point where you can just throw it all to the middle of the zone, and your stuff takes it where it needs to go. And I don't know that I think that Mitch Keller has turned into an ace that will always be an ace every year. Like, I don't know if he's like, he might actually be lower on my dynasty rankings than because he still has that whiff of, maybe next year the command isn't going to be there, but yeah, I had him ranked too low. Where would I have him ranked going forward? Top 50 at least. I mean,
yeah,
top
I think
40.
That's top 40. Yeah, all right. Top 40 seems at least like a good starting point. So many guys have been hurt. That also brings him up even more. It's just who's really left. But I think if you start treating him more like a longer term kind of fringe SP2, solid SP3, that's really good. That's much more than we thought Mitch Keller was going to be 2 years ago. I think 2 years ago it was like, what's wrong with this guy? Can he ever put it together? And now it looks like he's the pitcher that scouting grades years ago pointed to, where he's got a deep arsenal of pitches and commands it all well enough to make it work. That's the guy he was supposed to be. It just took a longer path for him to get there.
Yeah. I don't know. With the would you rather is probably, let me see if I can find one. Man, I wish I had Excel, dude.
Would you take Mitch Keller over Julio Urias for the rest of the season?
I just put Urias on a buy low. I'm having the ass right now. Okay, there we are. Pitching ranks. I had Urias 33rd. How about versus Logan Gilbert?
Projections would tell you that it's supposed to be close, based on Gilbert being surprisingly poor projections-wise. I'd rather have Gilbert than Keller, but I don't think it's a landslide, and it would have been a landslide 2 months ago.
Yeah. It's funny how much injury changes things. Like, I'm just looking at, the injury thing's so hard this year. Just cobbling together a pitching staff. Like, I'm looking at my top 40 and I'm like, well, that injured. So like he could be in the top 30 just because everyone ahead of him is injured.
Yeah, it's going to put some really interesting young guys high on that list though too. Like Bryce Miller. Is Bryce Miller clearly ahead of Mitch Keller?
He's healthy. I don't think he's ahead of Mitch Keller just because you have to be reasonable.
Yeah. You have to be reasonable, but do you? Like, do you really have to be reasonable in this game?
Like, where do you put veterans that are a step away from being injured, like Blake Snell, or or like how about just like a credible, not exciting veteran like Kodai Senga?
And
he's healthy.
Senga, we don't have the track record in Major League Baseball either to fall back on.
Yeah.
We still have some, how does this really play in this league? Obviously, you can have equivalents, but there's still questions there. Wow, it's tough. I think Mitch Keller versus Alek Manoah, that seemed impossible 2 months ago. If you'd given anybody playing fantasy baseball their choice of Manoah versus Keller, even people low on Manoah, would have said,
people like me,
of course,
high on
I'll
Keller.
take Manoah. Right, because think about where you probably had them ranked. Manoah somewhere 30 to 40, Keller 70
I was
to 80.
aggressive with Keller and I had him like 72 or something.
Right, yeah, you might have been ahead of everybody else with your Keller ranking, and you still would have preferred Manoah. Has that flipped?
Ooh, look at this. Manoah has a 3.33 ERA away from home.
Was that like
That's
4
crazy.
starts?
Yeah, but it's a 770 at home.
He's got a 17% K rate right now for the season. Oh, and he's walking guys. It's
And May
scary.
has been better by results, but he has a 3.72 K9 in May.
It's real scary
I think
with
I might
Manoah
take
right
Keller. I was always pushing Manoah down, so.
now. What a strange couple of years for Manoah. He comes up right away, has a ton of success with 35 minor league innings among the class of pitchers that with no 2020 season. There's just like that gaping hole. Comes up, has success, gets even better over the full season. And because he logged so many innings, it was like, well, even if the K rate's a little low, it's fine. He's going to be among the AL leaders in innings.
Dominant breaking ball.
And it's just broke for a little while. I don't know if it's broken for good. We talked about it maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, and you were more concerned than I was. I now share your elevated level of concern. This
He
is
also
not
has no pitch above 100 by Stuff Plus, although the fastballs and the slider are close.
I know generally the old adage has always been, buy low, sell high. I think it's more of the opposite. I think it's like trade players away before their value completely craters. In the case of Manoah, he might be on his way to the bottom. You might have willing trade partners who think he will get back to projections. They might look at Zips or a projection that's better than what he's done so far and say, yeah, he could still be that guy. And I'm not saying he's toast and what you see right now is what you get the rest of the season, but I don't think we're getting the pre-2023 version anytime soon based on what he looks like right now. He's just not locating well. I watched, I think it's last two starts or 2 of his last 3, and it was uncomfortable. He was not getting things where he wanted them.
I think the lack of Ks is a big place to start looking. No matter what you think of the stuff model, the Ks and K minus BB is super important. And so if you were looking at, say, a teammate of his, Chris Bassett, excuse me.
Bless you.
If you were looking at Chris Bassett, he wasn't pitching well, but his Ks were there at least. I don't know where I would put Bassett right now either.
He's had a gem this weekend against Atlanta too.
The last 2 have been pretty good, but the one before against Pittsburgh, in Pittsburgh, 5 strikeouts and 4 walks. A little bit weird. But no runs. That seems right. I put Bassett ahead of Kodai. I would put Keller ahead of Manoah right now, man. The guy that we got wrong, or I got wrong, was Chris Sale in those rankings, and his early Stuff Plus numbers were pretty horrid, and his projections were also horrid. And the dumbest thing about it is his Stuff Plus has just gotten better, and that's not how it's supposed to work. It's supposed to be pretty stable throughout the season. But maybe what I should have done is say, hey, this guy has a long track record of success and he's coming back from injury. And maybe I shouldn't just declare him dead based on, an early Stuff Plus. I will say, though, last 14 days, Chris Sale still doesn't have a pitch above 100 on Stuff Plus. The Ks, though, are there. So if you're trying to figure something out, if somebody has Ks and Stuff Plus and isn't pitching and isn't getting good results, they're still a good buy low. If they have Ks and they don't have that Stuff Plus, I think you still have to consider them an interesting buy low.
Yeah, he's been around for a long time, but is it still fair to describe Chris Sale as deceptive in his delivery? Fair, right?
I don't think it's a slot that a lot of people throw from, yeah.
Right. So I just wonder if that's also part of how he has sustained the excellent K rate. Everything's kind of back now. The home run rate, I think, was really high for a little while. That's even cooled off. I mean, this looks like typical Sale as far as your underlying numbers, your K rate, your walk rate, your home run rate. That's what I was hoping for. I'm really glad to see it because I was on the other side of that one. We talked, so Sale versus Snell, I think, was our toss up, and they both could be fine, but the rust factor, that's the hard part of this. It's the rust factor. It's over the previous 3 seasons combined, Chris Sale threw 48 and a third innings. So how long does it take to get it all back? Spring training plus X number of innings in the regular season before he's good to go. Maybe it's a similar question we should be asking about James Paxton. If Paxton's numbers were scary, maybe that'd be a reason to give him some runway.
Also, look at the velo. Snell was 93.3 in his early starts, and he's up to 95, 96 in the last starts. James Paxton was, 95, 94 when he was pitching well, and not when he was hurt, and he's up to 96 again this year. So that makes me pretty excited about him.
So a lot to unpack there, but the main focus of today's show was supposed to be rest of season projections, navigating a buzzkill, because they really are disappointing. If you've got a player that's breaking out and you go look at the rest of season projection, it usually pulls you back somewhere close to league average, sometimes even a little below. And you're like, this guy's been 30, 40, 50% better than league average. Why can't he keep being that much better than league average? And that's just not how it works. Sometimes you reach this level that you can't sustain over a long period of time because you played your absolute best 6 weeks in the first 6 weeks. That's a thing that can happen. Sometimes the league figures you out. Sometimes there's some other explanation. But this does go back into what I was saying before. The buy low side, that's easy to see. Someone's underperforming. You think they're going to bounce back to their projection. You did a piece about this, I think a week, maybe 2 weeks ago now. I know Jose Abreu was in it. And I was looking at the players that have bad WRC pluses so far, but very good WRC pluses for the rest of the season, looking at the BAT X. Abreu is one of the biggest differences if you look at projection versus actual results. And if you use a model similar to what we just used with Mitch Keller, you say, well, is it just this season for Jose Abreu? Or if you go back to the second half of last season, do you see some warts that make you more concerned that the projection is taking too much good Abreu, too much of a player that he more recently just hasn't been? Because I think this can happen sometimes where we get sort of tricked, and especially with players that are at the later part of their career, we know projections start to become less reliable. So how much of a red flag is this pretty rough 6 week stretch from Jose Abreu?
The one thing that really bothers me is that I think the bat speed might be gone because he really is struggling against fastballs. And if you can't produce against fastballs, I think that's really a bad sign. And you've got, this is Jose Abreu from, 2015 to 2018. He had slugging percentages in the 500s, the high 500s. Then he hit his peak in 2019 and 2020. He had a 616 slugging against fastballs. Jose Abreu did. In 2020, he had a 667. 2021, he had a 566. 2022, he had a 404. 2023, Jose Abreu is slugging 233 against four-seam fastballs. I don't know where in season you're going to turn around. He's now seen 1,170 fastballs. 1,200 fastballs since the beginning of 2022, and he's slugging under 400 on those. I don't know, man. How's that going to turn on a dime?
Doesn't seem like it will.
Yeah, I don't know. I saw a little bit of this. I talked about this when they signed him, and it was certainly a possibility. I figured he would still to make contact, and if he only hit 15 homers, he would be only as good as he was last year when he was 37% better than league average. But the thing about having a hole and the league, quote unquote, figuring it out, like you're talking about, is that they can sort of just fester at that. So they've discovered something, and he's not been able to adjust his way out of it. So the track record would say, yes, he'll find a way to adjust out of it. I don't know, hitting a bunch of sliders.
Well, and then does one vulnerability sometimes lead to another, right? So let's say his adjustment is, well, I'm just going to look high fastball. I'm going to cheat. I'm going to start early on high fastballs. Well, now breaking stuff down causes problems, or something else opens up.
The whiff rate is up. The strikeout rate is the highest it's ever been.
Yeah, so it starts to it's like it's a snowball coming down the mountain. It's like you've got this one problem, and problems just keep compounding with each other and keep getting worse. So I don't know if Jose Abreu is a 15-team league drop because he plays every day. That lineup's going to get better. The counting stats might be
He's gotta
okay.
have some good stretches.
But the shallow leagues that are out there, 10 and 12-team leagues, that's tough.
Seems like he could be a dropper.
But I think the main thing that is really important in all of this is to talk about who you're actually going to instead. I think that was something that Zach Waxman had on Twitter. There were some teams that actually dropped Jose Abreu, but the players they were picking up for him were not clearly better. And I think that's the hardest part about all of this is like, are you going to give up on the chance that this guy doesn't fit? Like, you give up on the possibility of someone with a really good track record figuring it out to take a chance on someone whose projection is still worse than what you're dropping. Someone who's a league average at best player with playing time concerns. Abreu shouldn't have playing time concerns for the next couple of months. You
don't believe the projection, but I want to start with the projection, right? So the rest of season in the auction calculator, 13th best first baseman going rest of the season. Now, let's say you don't believe that, right? So at least you should be looking around that for pickups, right? So, okay, I don't have to say that I have to pick up somebody above 13th. I can pick up somebody below because I don't believe the 13th, right? Mm-hmm. So Alek Bohm, okay, well, probably not there, right? Vinny Pasquantino, probably not there. Anthony Rizzo, probably not there. Jake Cronenworth, projected to be worth $2, worth Jose Abreu's $4. This is in a 12-team league with one. I have no CI. I could put a CI in there, but it doesn't matter in terms of just first baseman. He's ranked 4 spots behind. I think it'd be okay. Yeah, you could take Cronenworth. Now, Josh Naylor.
Right? A player that's more likely to be available in those 12-team leagues, those 10-team leagues, because he's also off to a slow start.
And I can do this. I could do this. I might look stupid in the end, but I can do this. I'm taking Josh Naylor over Jose Abreu because their projections aren't actually that different. And the batting average, I think, for Naylor, we've already started to see it heat up in Cleveland. And there's a massive weird temperature split in Cleveland where it's like the average day in April in Cleveland is like 55 or something, and then it jumps to like 65 in May.
It's the Midwest, dude. It's all over the place.
Is that like a Midwest thing? I was looking at that.
It's a Midwest city on a lake, right? I mean, Cleveland's on Lake Erie. It's one of those places. Milwaukee has weather swings like this where
it's cold and then it's hot.
It'll be 80 degrees for a random day in May, and then it'll be 45 a couple days later, or even the next day. It changes that fast. It's just the way it is. Plus,
he's a 25-year-old. He's not having the bat speed issues. He's a left-hander in the year that pulls a lot in the time of the shift restrictions. He has the raw velo. He has the barrel rate. I don't know. I'll take Naylor over Jose Abreu. I don't know if that's pushing it. After that, it gets worse, and I'm not sure I see another one. So I see Josh Bell. I don't know. I think I might take Abreu over Bell. Arise is just that's such a edge case. Yeah, I guess if you want just batting average and you can give up the power. Will Myers, no. Spencer Steer seems like pushing it.
Yeah.
Am I saying anybody that you would you take Naylor over Abreu?
I think I would. I like Naylor. I think the evidence was there going into last season. He could take a step forward, and he did it. I think even if the weather hasn't been the only reason, I still think he's got enough core skills where I trust the younger guy possibly retaining last year's level or something close to it, as opposed to the older player trying to get back to something that looks out of reach right now. 116 WRC plus, just I have a hard time buying that for Abreu. I think it's going to be more like an even 100 the rest of the way from him, and that's okay, but it's not great. And I think this list, I pulled a few random names together. Eduardo Escobar made the list only because he's one of those deep league players that costs nothing in trade, becomes available quickly, even in a 15-team league when things aren't going well. So he's on the list, along with George Springer and Starling Marte and Tim Anderson. And injuries have cost some of these guys some time too, so their sample sizes are smaller. Jesse Winker, Teoscar Hernandez, and even Bobby Witt Jr., who's production, relatively speaking, still isn't lagging that bad. It's an 89 WRC plus with a 123 rest of season projection from the Bat X. So like Witt's sort of like, I'm not that worried about him. Some people might be.
Not. I mean, I see a lot of people asking me about trading Witt. And I've gotten personally fielded a bunch in the last week, and I would say that this is a poor time to sell Bobby Witt. And I know that you were talking about, hey, before something craters, I don't see Bobby Witt in that position. I know his OBP is under 300, and it is again. And I know he's a flawed player right now, but he's so young, and the core skills are good enough to make him like, is he Javi Baez? Like, he's not, I don't think he's as flawed as Javi Baez was in terms of plate approach. And if he's not as flawed as Javi Baez was, Javi Baez had a lot of great years, you know? So that's how I see Bobby Witt, is like, maybe he won't be a top 3 player in the league. You know, like people felt like that might be in his possibilities. He's still going to be really good. Like even if he just continues what he's doing this year, he's going to end up 233 with 25 homers and 35 steals. Like what? Come on now. So don't trade that in a keeper league. Don't trade that in any league, I don't think. So he's off the list for me. And I think Tim Anderson, for some extent, is off the list too. I think I think that's an injury thing. But if you want my Lodem guys, if you want my guys that I can't find a reason to like them, and I can't tell you that there's a number that makes them infinitely gettable. The Lodem guys are Jose Abreu, Eduardo Escobar, and Jesse Winker. There is nothing there that I can say, but at least there's nothing.
Yeah, with Winker, I mean, it's a 36.2% hard hit rate so far with 58 batted ball events.
3% barrel rate for him and Escobar, basically.
Unfortunately, so a lot of the players I liked as buy lows this year were players that were injured last year. The downside of that is sometimes they don't come all the way back healthy. So whether it's rust he hasn't knocked off yet or just not getting it back physically, there's some growing evidence here that Winker is just not the guy that he was before he got flipped to Seattle. And if the Brewers are going to keep trotting him out there every day against righties, hoping he turns it around, sure, the counting stats could be okay, but the power that I was hoping for, the 20 home run power, even 25 home runs in that ballpark, that does not look like it's coming back based on what he has done to this point. Teoscar Hernandez looks like a legitimate guy you'd still trade for right now, right? Because the barrel rate's excellent. He's always had this sort of volatile up and down profile because of the swing and miss.
I don't like him in keeper leagues that much because of that sort of the combination of age approaching. He's turning 30. He's 30 almost turned. He's going to turn 31 this year, and the K percentage is up, and the walks are down, and I just don't love this type of player as they age. But in terms of this year, I think I would trade for him.
Yeah, and I think as far as Witt goes, it's just in a long-term league, you previously may not have been able to even engage someone else who had him on a roster to trade him. I think you could at least find someone willing to trade him now. It's still going to be expensive because they're going to see the power speed combo, all the things that you see and like about Bobby Witt Jr. But I would explore that. I'd push because this could be one of the last chances to get him in a multi-year league. And I think the payoff is going to be there, even if he just continues to do mostly what he's done. But there should still be one more level that he can unlock. I think there's reason to believe he'll start walking a little bit more over time. K rate's not a problem where it's at right now. He makes good quality contact. And of course, he runs quite a bit too. So there's a few slow starters that I still believe in from that group. But I'm unfortunately starting to take the L on Jesse Winker along with you. The other side of this, I think, is pretty challenging too, though, because the players that have been carrying you, either guys that you drafted late, maybe you picked them up off the waiver wire, they're playing really well, and you want to believe, you want to say this is going to happen, this is going to keep going for the rest of the season. This is guys like Brent Rooker, Josh Lowe, Jarren Duran, Jesus Sanchez, Brandon Marsh, a lot of guys that we've liked for a while. Those last four, especially Lowe, Duran, Sanchez, and Marsh, they've popped up on sleeper lists and undervalued lists, target lists for a couple of seasons now. They have all been performing really well. Ezekiel Duran, a little bit more like Brent Rooker, where it's something of a surprise. There were interesting skills in the past, but I don't think as many people were on Duran as they were on the other four. So you see these guys all kind of projected to go back closer to league average. Rooker is up to a 113 rest of season projection now from the Bat X. And I actually have this kind of newer theory. I think as long as the projected level is close to league average or above, a player reaching a new level of success has sort of crossed this threshold where they're not as risky as they were coming into the season. The bottom falling out on Lowe or Duran seems a lot less likely now because they've done enough to move that baseline up. They've kind of gained trust from a quantitative perspective.
Yeah. It's interesting because in terms of batted ball quality, all these guys are breaking out or sustaining levels of batted ball oomph that makes me super excited about them. Every single one of these guys has hit the ball 111 miles an hour. Every single one of these guys is barreling the ball better than 8.7 for March, but let's say 9%. 10% is a number that I keep in mind as a sort of a divider. And if you're talking about Lowe, Rooker, Sanchez, and Duran, they're barreling beyond that. Actually, Sanchez, Lowe, and Rooker. So you've got guys that are all barreling the ball well. They've hit max EVs they haven't hit in the past. Their hard hit rates are all high. There can be regression in those things, right? They can have months where they barrel the ball and then months where they don't. Even though this is more signal than noise, they can still regress off of it. And so I tend to my eye wanders over to the strikeout rate and the swinging strike rate. And, there's still a lot of reason to believe in them there too. Lowe, Rooker, Duran, and Marsh have all improved their strikeout rate over their career numbers. And the weirdest part is Marsh changed his swinging strike rate, right? And yet he's been striking out more, because I remember looking at Marsh's strikeout rate and being like, oh, like that's really good. And now it's back up to 30%.
Yeah.
So Jaron Duran, I want to say, oh, he's really changed his strikeout rate. Has he? And Brent Rooker, he's really changed his strikeout rate. He's still swinging strike rate is high. So I think Rooker will have a month where he goes in the tank. I think he'll have a month where he hits 200 with 3 homers.
But I think that's part of the profile Rooker has. I think more established players who barrel the ball the way he does, that have that free swinging approach or that aggressive approach, it's the Teoscar Hernandez problem in a different form, right? You get the good and you get the occasional bad, but the net result is still far enough above average where you ride those waves. You take it. I think Rooker, for me, is that kind of player. I don't know if you can get to the Teoscar Hernandez multi-year peak or not. He's a little older, so it might be harder for him to sustain it. But I think that's more of the mold that he fits into.
Yeah, he's like a 3 true outcome guy is another way of saying what you're saying, right? Like there'll be days when the batting average projected 230, he'll have months where he hits 210, 230, but maybe he'll have another month where he hits 300 again, right? And that's what you're sort of saying is you're bouncing around a new mean in a way. And maybe the projections don't quite capture that. In any case, I like all these guys. I think the guy that I'm most excited about long-term in this group is Jaron Duran, because there's a real change in his swing strike rate, and there were stops in the minors where he didn't strike out as much as he did when he first got to the majors. The tools are all there. He's really capitalizing on those tools. He hit a ball 114 in AAA, which is now showing up on Fangraphs, which is kind of amazing. But he hit the ball 114 in AAA, and he hasn't even done that in the major leagues yet. So there might be another level to the power, and the speed is obviously there. And so what if he ends up a left fielder instead of a center fielder because of some poor routes? I think he's playing so well now that he's played his way in the lineup, and it doesn't matter if he's a center fielder anymore. And honestly, I think they'll probably try him again in center field.
Yeah, I think they probably will at some point. I think having the other skill to fall back on, the speed skill on top of pop, is such a nice thing to have, because even if the power is not going to sustain at the current level, it's not nothing. And then Bags can always help make up some of that gap. So I'm with you. I think Jaren Duran's legit. Jesus Sanchez has a hamstring injury right now. Actually, I'm buying into this being a little bit of a post-hype breakout for deeper leagues. Once he comes back from that injury, I think Sanchez is going to be a pretty clear pickup for me in those mid-range mixed leagues where he might still be available. And
doing with a 405 BABIP though, so like
I mean it's not. I still think there's batting average risk because of a high K rate, but I think he's getting to that power consistently enough where they're going to keep playing him because they need power in that Miami lineup. And I think what Marsh is doing right now is meaningful. I don't think it's 295, 410, 545 really ever again over a prolonged stretch. This is one of the better stretches of productivity of his career. He's got a 426 BABIP underneath that. But I think part of what's happening is he's getting back to being the player he was in the minor leagues. He's being more selective at the plate. He's not chasing outside the zone as much. We've seen pretty decent barrel rates from him over the course of his career. He's in line with that right now. It's a pretty hitter-friendly environment as well. His glove keeps him out there a lot too. So I wouldn't be worried about a full-on crash from Brandon Marsh. I think he'll actually finish above league average for the season too, with so much above average production already baked in. I think this is a good version of a very solid player.
Yeah. The most pessimistic projections, he'll still be out on the field, because of the defense. Steamer 236, 312, 378. I have a hard time with that one. It looks like a different kind of approach now. And that's what I also want to see. Like we were talking about, he was more selective in the minor leagues. It's like, that's the same thing I'm saying with Duran. It's like, he came up, he went from, Jaren Duran had, strikeout rates in the high 19s and the low 20s for Boston. 23% in AAA, 24% in AA. And yes, then he goes and he has a 36% in the major leagues. And this is the type of player we've talked about ad nauseum on the show, which is like, why do some guys go from 23 to 36 and some guys go from 23 to 25, But maybe the answer part of it is time. And now look at him, 23% strikeout rate in the big leagues, So I like to look back at minor league track records too when I'm looking at these breakouts, because if it starts to look more like they did, you would have predicted them to do when they first came up based on their minor league track record, then they've kind of done it before, and they're just kind of finally doing what they were supposed to do. In some respects, this list is all post-hype sleepers.
It's a lot of guys like that. I had the full version of the spreadsheet when I was looking at it. And, Josh Lowe, I've said this on the show before. I think I was wrong about him 3 times. I was wrong about him enough times to not have him everywhere for this, which makes me feel terrible. I wish this was helping me retroactively from the last few seasons when I thought he'd come up and be a really good contributor for the Rays. I think with Lowe, it's funny that it's sort of the opposite of what we've seen with Brandon Marsh. Brandon Marsh chasing outside the zone less often. Josh Lowe swinging outside the zone more often. That's not necessarily in and of itself why he's good. I think he's just being more aggressive and not ending up in bad situations where he's in 2 strikes. My speculation is anyway, he's not ending up in 2-strike counts as often because he's lowered his K rate by 10 percentage points. He's down to a 23.1% K rate with his O swing going the wrong direction. He's hitting the ball hard. I don't know if this barrel rate's necessarily where he's going to sit. 14.5% seems a little high for him, because this is a guy that is slugging .631 right now and had a previous slugging career high last year at AAA of .556. So there's always been a lot of interesting tools. I think I'm kind of splitting the difference between what he's done so far and what the rest of season projections are saying. I think he's made enough meaningful adjustments where I would take the over across the board on everything the projected slash line says he's going to be on every projection system.
And if you look at the heat maps, like just a real difference in what he can do at the top of the zone. I know it's narrative, but it explains the breakout, right? You look at the heat maps, say he couldn't hit anything at the top of the zone. Now he can. Maybe the league will find another hole somewhere else, right? It could. And maybe what we've learned is it might take him a little time. Maybe it takes him longer to cover up holes. I don't know. But it also was at the very beginning of his career. It might have been the first hole that taught him how to cover up other holes in the future. You know what I mean? Like maybe the next time he encounters, something where the league is like, oh, now they're filling me up with back foot sliders. He's going to be like, man, the last time this happened, I thought I could never make it. I thought I was not a major league player anymore. I went into a spiral and they had to send me into the minor leagues to recover my confidence, recover everything. I'm not going to do that this time. It's just back foot sliders. I'm just going to go into the cage and work on back foot sliders and get back in there. You know what I mean? So they do, like, this is something that you can actually prove about players, is that as they age, they do get less volatile. And part of that is because they have better sense of what to do. And Gabe Kapler talks about trying to manufacture confidence with his young players in terms of like telling them about all the times that he thought he was never going to play again. Like he went to Japan and was terrible in Japan, Kapler said. And, you know, I tell them about that all the time because I had 6 more years in the big leagues after that. And I thought, I'm terrible in Japan. No one's ever going to give me a job again. So, you know, that sort of like, I still have a chance. I have a reason to be here. That's what happens, I think, a lot of times with somebody like Brent Rooker. Think about it. I mean, he was on waivers and he was out there to be had pretty quickly, even though he was a first round pick, you know, like people thought he was going to be great. You know, sometimes it just takes landing in Oakland and knowing, hey, I'm going to have all year.
Gonna have a job tomorrow. Yeah.
Yeah. So the name that I have on this list that just is a total blind spot for me is Ezekiel Duran. I just missed him. I don't know why haven't I thought about him? I mean, his strikeout rates are a little high in the minors, but he had good ISOs. I mean, he's not really he's a 50 future value, so he's going to be on lists. He's the 4th ranked over at Fangraphs,
right?
Among prospects for the Rangers. He's supposed to be good. He's playing shortstop for them now, so he has defensive ability. He's probably going to stay up when Corey Seager comes up because he's proven that he can play, right? Like that just gives him an extra infielder, and you know they can move guys around. I don't know what did I miss? I guess he whiffs a lot.
He whiffs, and he's never walked a ton. So from a pure, just like, what's his real offensive value? Is he going to be in the bottom third of the order? Are the plate skills going to hold up enough for him to get the playing time? One of those guys where you can sort of look past the tools because you just don't know if the core foundation is solid enough, but it looks pretty real to me. I mean, I don't think I think compared to Lowe, you know, I think I buy into what the rest of season projections say in this case. I think it comes down to how you see him fitting in Texas as to whether or not you would actually sort of buy high on him. With Seager back in the equation, Nathaniel Lowe plays every day. Marcus Semien plays every day. Josh Young should play pretty much every day. They don't really have an established DH, though, so they can let Duran play every day. He's a good enough defender to give some of those guys rest. He can move her all over the infield if they want him to. So I think it works out. I think
Mitch Garver rehab starts May 23rd. So, and Seager's
back soon, like this week.
I think so. I thought, yeah. Activated for Monday's game, even.
And even you can play Duran in the outfield. I would say
until May 23rd, right?
Mm-hmm.
Until May 23rd, he's fine because they don't have a DH. They have the roster spot. I would expect that he survives the Seager up, and then play him in the outfield because Grossman's all right. But what if he can play center as a former shortstop? You know,
yeah, that would help him.
Or I don't know, or just become one of the outfield mix. I think he's a better hitter than Bubba Thompson. You know, so Bubba Thompson's up. You just have to think: can Grossman play center, or like, you know, can Duran play center? And can you figure that out over the next couple of weeks? Can you just send him some fly balls out there? I mean, it's a roster crunch. Once Garver's back, then the question is, can Garver just be a catcher for us, and we just keep Duran up anyway?
I think you want to keep playing Jonah Heim, though. I think Jonah Heim is a great defender, and he's actually showing a ton at the plate this year. One of the biggest steps forward.
I'm not saying play him less. I'm just saying, can Garver be another catcher for us?
Just to occasionally make the pieces fit that way.
Here's you're wasting him because he's got a projection for like 20% better than league average with the stick.
I think my only lingering doubt about Duran is that so far for his career, it's a 43% O swing percentage. And it's going the wrong direction.
That's what it looks like. I mean, he definitely looks a little bit like Adolis Garcia-esque in terms of, you know, can hit the ball hard, can throw the ball hard, can run a little bit, and has a very poor plate approach.
But that's absolutely in the danger zone for O swing, where you're like, ooh, he could get real cold and fall out of playing time, especially on a team that is healthy and has a lot of other really stable players up and down the lineup. I think it works in Durant's favor. He's toolsy and he can play good defense at positions of need. The thing that works against him, he's probably still a little too aggressive, even for someone who's going to be good because he's aggressive, if that makes sense. On that note,
I mean, that like, if they want the cover of like, we need to send him down to work on something, like, you don't look at this line and say, this guy has nothing to work on.
No, it's being more selective, swinging less at pitches outside the strike zone, 100%. But I think the good might outweigh the bad, even though the bad is pretty scary with that number being as high as it is for Ezekiel Duran. We are going to go. We'll save the mailbag questions for Wednesday. We get some mailbag stuff coming up on Tuesday too. Yeah, and unfortunately, I drank a giant can of water before we started, so I can't extend this episode any further. So on that note, you can sign up for a subscription to The Athletic. $2 a month gets you in the door at theathletic.com/rates and barrels. Find Eno on Twitter at Eno Saris. You can find me at Derek Van Riper. That's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you on Tuesday.
Thanks for listening.